The sound of the slap echoed through my dining room louder than any words could have. I stood there, my cheek burning, staring at my daughter-in-law's furious face while my son, my own son, laughed and said, "Well, Mom, maybe now you'll learn to mind your own business." In that moment, with 20 of our family members watching in stunned silence, I realized I'd raised a stranger. Before we begin, sweetheart, if this story touches you even a little, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where my family is tuning in from. My name is Amelia, and I'm 58 years old. I've lived most of my life in a suburb outside of Seattle, Washington, in a comfortable home where I raised my 3 children, 2 daughters and a son. My husband, Robert, passed away 6 years ago from a sudden heart attack, and since then, I've worked hard to keep our family close, to maintain the traditions he and I built together. My oldest daughter, Sarah, lives in Boston with her husband and 2 children. My youngest daughter, Kate, is finishing her residency in California. And then there's my middle child, my son, Jackson. Jackson was always the one who needed me most, even as an adult. He was sensitive as a boy, prone to tears and needing constant reassurance. I protected him, maybe too much. When kids teased him at school, I marched into the principal's office. When he struggled with math, I hired tutors. When he had his heart broken in college, I drove 4 hours to be with him. Jackson works in tech sales and does well for himself. 3 years ago, he met a woman named Malia at a work conference. When he first told me about her, he was excited in a way I'd never heard before. "Mom, she's amazing," he'd said over the phone. "She's confident, successful, knows exactly what she wants. She's nothing like anyone I've dated before." I met Malia for the first time at a dinner Jackson organized at an upscale restaurant downtown. She arrived in a designer dress, her dark hair perfectly styled, makeup flawless. She was striking, I'll give her that. She had this presence that commanded attention. Throughout dinner, she talked mostly about herself, her job in corporate consulting, her expensive gym membership, her apartment in the city, her plans to travel to Europe. When she did ask about me, it felt perfunctory, like checking a box. "So, Amelia, Jackson says you're retired?" she'd asked. "Semi-retired," I'd clarified. "I still do bookkeeping for several small businesses from home." "Oh, how nice," she'd said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Then she'd turned back to Jackson and continued talking about a vacation she was planning. I'd told myself I was being overly critical, that I was just being protective because no woman would ever be quite good enough for my son. I tried to like her, I really did. 6 months later, Jackson called to tell me they were engaged. I was happy for him, or I tried to be. But everything was moving so fast. I barely knew this woman, and now she was going to be my daughter-in-law. The wedding planning began immediately, and that's when I started to see more of who Malia really was. She took over every aspect of the planning with an iron grip. It had to be her vision, her way, her style. I'd offered to help with costs. Robert had left me with a decent life insurance policy, and I wanted to contribute to my son's wedding. Malia had smiled tightly and said, "That's generous, Amelia, but we want to do this ourselves. We don't want to feel obligated to anyone about our choices." The implication was clear. If I paid, I'd want a say, and she wasn't going to allow that. The wedding itself was beautiful but impersonal. It was held at an expensive venue with over 200 guests, most of whom I didn't know. They were Malia's friends, her colleagues, her family. My side of the family was there, of course, but we felt like extras in someone else's production. During the reception, I'd approached Jackson during a quiet moment. I'd squeezed his hand and said, "I'm so happy for you, sweetheart. I hope you know how much I love you." He'd hugged me quickly, already looking over my shoulder. "Thanks, Mom. Hey, I need to go say hi to Malia's boss. We'll catch up later, okay?" Later never came. The rest of the reception was a blur of forced smiles and small talk with people who didn't know me. After the wedding, Jackson and Malia settled into their life together. I saw my son less and less. We used to talk on the phone every week, sometimes twice a week. Now it dropped to once a month, if that. "We're busy, Mom," he'd say. "Malia's work schedule is crazy, and we're trying to spend our free time together." I understood. I did. They were newlyweds. They needed their space. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being shut out deliberately. The first real conflict came about 8 months after their wedding, during the holidays. I'd always hosted Thanksgiving at my house. It was a tradition Robert and I had started when the kids were small. I called Jackson to invite them, as I always did. There was a pause on the line. "Actually, Mom, Malia and I are going to her parents' place this year." The surprise must have shown in my voice. "Oh, I didn't realize. Will you come by before or after, even just for dessert?" Another pause. "We're actually driving there the day before and staying through the weekend. Maybe we can do something another time?" I'd swallowed my hurt. "Of course, that sounds nice. Tell Malia's family hello from me." What happened next is what really stung. I found out later, through my daughter Sarah, that Jackson and Malia had actually been in town that Thanksgiving. They hadn't gone to Malia's parents at all. They'd hosted a Friendsgiving at their apartment with Malia's friends. When I gently asked Jackson about it later, he'd gotten defensive. "Mom, we wanted to do our own thing this year. It's not a big deal. Stop trying to guilt-trip me." I'd never guilt-tripped him. I'd simply asked a question. But suddenly, I was the villain. This became the pattern over the next year. Gradually, I was excluded from more and more of their lives. Birthdays would pass with late texts instead of calls. Christmas was spent at their apartment, but I was invited for only an hour in the afternoon, wedged between their brunch with friends and dinner with Malia's family. Malia's behavior toward me was always just on the edge of rude, but never quite crossing a line I could point to definitively. She'd make comments like, "Oh, Amelia, are you still wearing that style? How classic of you. It must be so relaxing to be at your stage of life, not having to worry about career advancement anymore." Each comment alone was nothing. Together, they created a constant undercurrent of dismissal and contempt. When I tried to mention it to Jackson once, he'd brushed it off. "Mom, Malia's just direct. She doesn't mean anything by it. You're being too sensitive." I was being made to feel like the problem, like the difficult mother-in-law who couldn't let go. My daughter Sarah had noticed the dynamic. "Mom," she'd said during one of our phone calls, "Jackson's different with her. He's changed. He doesn't stand up for you at all." "He's happy," I'd said, wanting to believe it. "That's what matters. He's building his life with his wife." "At your expense?" Sarah had asked pointedly. I hadn't wanted to believe that. My son wouldn't deliberately hurt me or allow someone else to hurt me. I'd convinced myself of that. Which brings me to the event that changed everything. Jackson's 30th birthday was coming up, and I wanted to do something special for him. It was a milestone birthday, after all. I thought maybe I could host a surprise party at my house, invite family and some of his old friends, make his favorite dinner. I called him a few weeks before his birthday to subtly gather information, make sure they'd be free, see if there was a day that worked better than others. "Actually, Mom," he'd said, "Malia's planning something for my birthday. She's handling it." "Oh, that's wonderful," I'd said. "Can I help? Or maybe I could bring dessert or—" "It's all taken care of," he'd interrupted. "But thanks." Left out again. I'd swallowed my disappointment and sent him a nice gift instead. A watch he'd mentioned wanting months ago, something I'd saved up for. 2 days before his birthday, I received a text from Malia. Not a call, a text. It was formal, almost like an invitation you'd send to an acquaintance. "Jackson's birthday gathering, Friday at 7 p.m. at our place. Casual dress. Please let me know if you can attend." I was surprised to be invited, honestly, given how they'd been. But I was grateful for the chance to celebrate my son. I showed up on Friday evening with the watch wrapped beautifully and a homemade chocolate cake, Jackson's favorite since he was a child. I'd always made him a chocolate cake with raspberry filling for his birthday. When I arrived at their apartment building, I could hear music and voices from the light hallway. I was nervous, though I couldn't quite say why. I knocked, and Malia answered the door. She looked me up and down, her expression unreadable. "Amelia, you're here." Not exactly warm, but I smiled anyway. I wouldn't miss Jackson's birthday. Happy birthday to my boy. She stepped aside to let me in. The apartment was full of people, maybe 20 or 25. I recognized only a handful: my daughters, Sarah and Kate, Jackson's cousin David, and a few of Jackson's old college friends. The rest were strangers, presumably Malia's friends and their work colleagues. Jackson was across the room talking to a group of people. When he saw me, he waved, but didn't come over immediately. He continued his conversation. I made my way to the kitchen to put down the cake and my purse. Sarah appeared beside me. "Hey, Mom," she said, giving me a hug. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," I said, confused by her tone. "Why wouldn't I be?" She gave me a look. "Just, this crowd isn't exactly your scene. Stick with Kate and me, okay?" I agreed, though I didn't fully understand her concern. About 20 minutes later, I brought out the cake. I'd placed it on the dining table where other desserts and snacks were laid out. It looked beautiful. 3 layers with raspberry filling, chocolate ganache frosting, and fresh raspberries on top. Malia appeared beside me almost immediately. She was looking at the cake, her expression strange. "What is this?" she asked. I was confused by the question. "It's Jackson's birthday cake," I said. "I make it for him every year. It's his favorite." "We already have a cake," Malia said coldly. She pointed to the other end of the table where an elaborate store-bought cake sat. Modern, geometric, decorated with gold leaf. It was impressive, but impersonal. "Oh, how lovely," I said, trying to smooth over the tension. "Well, now we have 2 cakes, more options for everyone." Malia's face hardened. "You just can't help yourself, can you?" I was taken aback. "I'm sorry?" "You always have to insert yourself," she hissed, her voice low enough that others couldn't hear over the music. "Always have to make everything about you. This is Jackson's party, not yours. I planned this. I ordered the cake. And here you come, undermining me like you always do." I was shocked. "Malia, I wasn't trying to undermine you. I just wanted to bring Jackson his favorite cake, like I do every year. I'm not competing with you." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. It was bitter, sharp. "Right, you're not competing. You're just always there, always hovering, always reminding Jackson that he's supposed to prioritize you. Newsflash, Amelia, he's not your little boy anymore. He's my husband." Our voices had risen slightly, and a few people nearby were starting to notice. My heart was pounding. "I know he's your husband," I said quietly, trying to calm the situation. "And I'm happy for you both. I just wanted to celebrate my son's birthday." "Your son," she repeated mockingly. Her face was flushed now, anger making her voice shake. "You act like you own him, like he owes you something because you raised him. That was your job, Amelia. That's what parents are supposed to do. You don't get a medal for it." I felt like I'd been slapped already, before the actual slap even came. "I've never asked for a medal," I said, my own voice shaking now with hurt and anger. "I've only ever wanted to love my children and be part of their lives." "Well, maybe Jackson doesn't want you in his life as much as you want to be," Malia sneered. "Did you ever think of that? Maybe he's just too nice to tell you to back off." The music had stopped. Everyone in the apartment was watching us now. Complete silence. I felt exposed, humiliated, standing there with this woman who was supposed to be family, who was attacking me in front of everyone. I looked around for Jackson, needing him to step in, to say something. He was standing about 10 feet away, watching this entire exchange. "Jackson," I said, my voice pleading, "please." I waited for him to come to my defense, to mediate, to do anything that showed he cared about how his wife was speaking to his mother. What happened instead will stay with me for the rest of my life. Malia turned to address the room, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," she announced, gesturing toward me like I was an exhibit. "This woman cannot let go. She shows up with this cake trying to be the center of attention at her adult son's birthday party. Poor Jackson has to deal with this constant guilt and manipulation." "That's not true," I said, but my voice came out weak. "I'm not trying to manipulate anyone." Malia stepped closer to me, invading my space. "You know what your problem is," she said, her voice venomous. "You're a lonely, bitter woman who can't accept that your son has moved on. It's sad, It's pathetic. Tears were forming in my eyes, not from her words, from the humiliation of this happening in front of so many people, from the fact that my son was standing there saying nothing. "I'm going to go," I said quietly, trying to preserve what little dignity I had left. I reached for my purse on the counter. That's when Malia grabbed my arm, hard. "No," she said. "You don't get to just leave and play the victim. You're going to acknowledge what you do, how you disrespect my marriage." I pulled my arm away from her grip. "Let go of me," I said, my voice firmer now. I'd had enough. I was done being attacked. And that's when it happened. Quick as a flash, Malia's hand flew up and slapped me across the face. The sound echoed through the apartment. The pain was sharp, immediate, but worse than the pain was the shock. For a moment, everything was frozen. I had my hand to my cheek, staring at her in disbelief. She stared back, still angry, breathing hard. The room erupted in murmurs and gasps. I heard Sarah's voice saying, "Oh my God." I saw Kate start to move toward me, but I was looking for Jackson. He was the only one who mattered in that moment. What would he do? How would he react to his wife physically striking his mother? His expression is burned into my memory. He didn't look shocked. He didn't look angry. He looked almost amused. There was a smirk on his face, and then he laughed. Not a nervous laugh or an uncomfortable laugh, a genuine laugh of amusement. "Well, Mom," he said, walking closer to where I stood, that cruel smile still on his face, "maybe now you'll learn to mind your own business." The world tilted sideways. The physical pain of the slap was nothing compared to hearing those words from my son. He was supporting her. He was condoning this, laughing at my humiliation. Sarah pushed past people to get to me. "Jackson, what is wrong with you?" she said, her voice shaking with anger. She turned to Malia. "And you, what the hell do you think you're doing? You can't just hit people." "She had it coming," Malia said. She actually shrugged. "Maybe this will teach her some boundaries." Kate was beside me now too, her arm around my shoulders. Her medical training was showing. She was checking my face, asking if I was okay, if I was dizzy. I wasn't okay, but I wasn't physically hurt beyond the sting of the slap. The real injury was watching my son stand beside his wife, watching them present a united front against me. Jackson's cousin David spoke up from across the room. "Dude, that's your mom. How are you just standing there?" Jackson's expression hardened. "You guys don't understand," he said. "My mom has been interfering in our marriage since day one. Malia's had enough. I've had enough. She was just defending our boundaries." Boundaries. That word again. Weaponized to make my hurt seem unreasonable. Sarah was furious. I'd never seen her this angry. "Boundaries?" she repeated to Jackson. "Boundaries are conversations and mutual respect. They're not physical violence. And Mom bringing a birthday cake isn't crossing boundaries. It's a normal, loving thing to do." Several other people in the room were murmuring agreement, clearly uncomfortable with what they'd witnessed. Some of Malia's friends, however, seemed to be nodding along with her, as if this was justified. I found my voice, though it shook. Looking at Jackson, not Malia, I said, "Is this really how you feel? Do you really think I deserve to be treated this way?" For just a second, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Conflict, perhaps. Doubt. I hoped, desperately hoped, that he would break, that he would remember who I was to him, what we'd been to each other. But then Malia's hand found his, and she squeezed it, and whatever I'd seen in his face disappeared, shutters falling. "I think you need to leave," he said. His voice was cold. It was a stranger's voice. "And I think you need to accept that you're not as welcome in our life as you think you are." The silence that followed was absolute. I turned to leave, Sarah and Kate moving with me, creating a protective barrier with their bodies. As we walked toward the door, I heard Malia say loudly, "Finally! Now maybe we can actually enjoy the party." There was some nervous laughter from a few people. My son was one of them. We got to my car, and that's when I broke down. Not gentle crying, but full-body sobs, the kind that come from somewhere deep and primal. My daughters held me in that parking lot, both of them crying too. "I'm so sorry, Mom," Sarah kept saying. "I should have warned you better. I knew something like this was going to happen. They've been so awful to you." Kate was angry, already talking about pressing charges. "That was assault," she said. "In front of witnesses. She should face consequences." I considered it. Part of me wanted to march back up there and call the police, make this scene have real consequences. But another part of me, the larger part, just wanted to be away from there, away from the people who were supposed to love me, but had shown nothing but contempt. "I just want to go home," I said finally. I was exhausted, emotionally drained. "I'll deal with the rest later." Sarah drove my car home while Kate followed in hers. They both stayed with me that night, neither one willing to leave me alone. I was grateful for them, for daughters who saw the situation clearly, who stood up for me. That night, I looked at my face in the bathroom mirror. There was a red mark on my cheek where Malia had hit me. It would fade by morning, probably. But the question remained, what was I supposed to do now? "Are you going to press charges?" Sarah asked when I came back out to the living room. I sat down heavily on the couch. "I don't know," I admitted. "If I do, it becomes this big legal thing. It'll tear the family apart even more." "Mom," Kate said sharply, her lawyer friend mind working, "the family is already torn apart. Your son stood there and laughed while his wife hit you. It can't get more torn than that." She was right. The truth of that statement settled over me like a heavy blanket. Over the next few days, I did make some calls. I spoke with a lawyer friend who confirmed that yes, what Malia did was assault, and yes, I could press charges. There were plenty of witnesses. But did I want to? Sarah had been in contact with David, Jackson's cousin, and several of Jackson's old friends who'd been at the party. Apparently, several of them had sent messages to Jackson telling him his behavior was unacceptable. According to David, Jackson was doubling down, insisting that Malia and he had done nothing wrong, that I was the problem. David also told Sarah something else. Apparently, Malia had been planning to cut me out for years. He'd overheard conversations where Malia talked about me like I was an obstacle, something in the way of her perfect life with Jackson. She'd been slowly isolating him from me, and Jackson had let it happen. It all made a horrible kind of sense. The gradual excluding from holidays, the dismissive comments, the way Jackson had changed over the years. It hadn't been sudden. It had been systematic. A week after the incident, I received a text from Jackson. Not an apology, a demand. "Mom, you need to apologize to Malia for ruining my birthday party. Your behavior was embarrassing. Until you can act like an adult and respect my wife, we don't have anything to say to each other." I read that text message multiple times, each time disbelieving what I was seeing. He wanted me to apologize for being slapped, for being humiliated, for having the audacity to bring my son a birthday cake. Sarah was with me when I got the text. She saw my face and took the phone from my hand. After reading it, she let out a string of words I won't repeat here. "Don't you dare apologize," she said fiercely. "Don't you dare. You did nothing wrong." Kate agreed. Both of my daughters were clear. I needed to stand my ground, to require a real apology from both Jackson and Malia, to set firm boundaries about how I would be treated. But the grief was overwhelming. I wasn't just angry. I was heartbroken. How had I raised a son who could treat me this way? Where did I failed? Had I done too much for him, made him too dependent, and now he was overcompensating by completely rejecting me? Or had I never really known him at all? I started seeing a therapist, something I probably should have done after Robert died but never got around to. Dr. Morrison was kind and practical. She asked good questions that made me think. "Amelia," she said during one session, "if a friend told you this story, that their adult child spouse had hit them, that their child had laughed and supported that violence, what would you tell your friend to do?" "I'd tell them to cut contact," I said immediately. I'd tell them they needed to protect themselves, that no one deserves to be treated that way. Then why is it different because it's your son? She asked gently. I had no good answer for that, except that love makes us vulnerable to mistreatment from the people we love most. We talked about cycles of behavior, about enabling, about the difference between loving someone and allowing them to harm you. We talked about boundaries, real boundaries, not the weaponized version Malia and Jackson threw around. True boundaries, Dr. Morrison explained, are about protecting yourself while still respecting the other person's autonomy. They're not about controlling someone else's behavior. They're about how you'll allow yourself to be treated. My boundary, I decided, was that I would not apologize for something I didn't do wrong, and I would not accept being disrespected or physically harmed. If that meant Jackson chose his wife over a relationship with me, that was his choice to make. It would be painful, but it was his choice. 1 month after the slap, I sent Jackson a formal letter. Not a text, not an email, but a physical letter. I wanted it to be serious, official. In it, I wrote calmly and measuredly. I acknowledged his marriage and his right to set boundaries in his life. But I also stated my own boundaries. Respect required. I required respect. Abuse not tolerated. I would not tolerate abuse, verbal or physical, from anyone, including his wife. No apology coming. I would not apologize for bringing him a birthday cake or for wanting to be part of his life. Open to reconciliation. I was open to reconciliation, but only if it involved genuine apologies from both him and Malia. Possibly family therapy. And a demonstrated change in how I was treated. I ended the letter by telling him I loved him, always would, that I always would, but not at expense, but that I loved myself too, and I wouldn't sacrifice my dignity for anyone. I sent it certified mail so I'd know he received it. 3 weeks later, I got a response. Also a letter, surprisingly. I'd hoped as I opened it that maybe it would be an apology, a breakthrough. It wasn't. The letter was cold, formal. It read like it had been written by Malia, though it was signed by Jackson. It said that they'd received my ultimatum, that they found it manipulative and controlling, and that they weren't going to play my games. Until I could grow up and accept that Jackson is an adult with his own family now, they would be maintaining distance. Distance meant no contact. They were, essentially, finalizing the cutoff. I sat with that letter for a long time. I cried again, but less than before. The grief was still there, but there was also clarity. I was seeing the situation clearly now, without excuse-making and hope that had colored my view for years. The truth was this. My son had made a choice. He'd chosen to align himself completely with his wife, even when she behaved abusively. He'd chosen not to defend me, not to set boundaries with her, not to stand up for basic decency. I couldn't make him change that choice. I could only control my own response to it. Sarah and Kate were furious on my behalf. Both wanted to confront Jackson, to cut him off themselves. I asked them not to. He's your brother, I said. Your relationship with him is separate from mine. I don't want to be the cause of dividing you all. Mom, he divided us when he chose to treat you this way, Sarah said firmly. But I'm not maintaining a close relationship with someone who thinks it's okay to laugh while their mother gets hit. I'll be polite at necessary family events, but that's it. Kate agreed. Both of my daughters were standing with me, and that meant everything. The holidays approached, and for the first time in over 30 years, I wasn't planning a big family Thanksgiving. Sarah invited me to Boston, which I considered. Kate invited me to California. But instead, I did something I'd never done before. I volunteered to help serve Thanksgiving dinner at a local shelter. That day was meaningful in ways I hadn't expected. The people there, both volunteers and guests, had stories. Many had been rejected by family, had lived hard lives, had lost things that mattered. But there was a sense of community, of people taking care of each other despite everything. I met an older woman named Dorothy who told me she hadn't spoken to her son in 15 years after he'd stolen money from her. It hurt like hell for a long time, she said. But eventually, I found peace. You can't force people to love you the way you deserve. You can only keep loving yourself and find the people who do see your worth. It was simple but profound advice. Christmas came, and I approached it similarly. I had a small celebration with Sarah's family, who flew in to spend time with me. Kate joined us via video call from California, where she was working a shift at the hospital. It was different, smaller, but it was okay. I was surrounded by people who actually loved me and showed it through their actions. There was no word from Jackson, no card, no call, no text. That was hard, but I was learning to accept it. A year after the slap, I was in a different place emotionally. It still hurt. It probably always would on some level. But the hurt wasn't consuming me anymore. I'd made changes in my life. I'd joined a garden club and made new friends. I'd taken on a part-time job at a local nonprofit, doing their bookkeeping and finding it meaningful. I'd grown closer to my daughters and their families. I'd built a life of my own, one that didn't revolve around trying to maintain a relationship with someone who didn't want one. I was still in therapy, working through the grief and the questions that probably didn't have answers. Dr. Morrison helped me work on forgiving myself, not my fault, for things that weren't my fault, but that I'd blamed myself for anyway. Not bad mother. I wasn't a bad mother. Didn't fail. I hadn't failed Jackson. He'd made his own choices as an adult, and those choices reflected on him, not on me. Jackson's cousin David would update me occasionally, though I didn't ask. Jackson and Malia were still together. They seemed fine on the outside. Social media posts of expensive dinners and vacations. But David, who still saw Jackson sometimes, said he seemed different. Less happy, more stressed. Malia was very controlling, apparently, and Jackson had lost touch with most of his old friends. I felt no satisfaction in hearing that, just sadness. I wished my son happiness, even if I wasn't part of his life. And then, about 14 months after the slap, I got a call. It was from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Mom?" The voice was tentative, quiet. It was Jackson. My heart stopped. I was completely caught off guard. For a moment, I couldn't speak. "Mom, are you there?" he asked. "I'm here," I said finally. My voice was carefully neutral. Not eager, not cold, just protected. There was a long silence. I could hear him breathing on the other end. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I don't know if you want to hear from me," he said. He sounded broken. Nothing like the cold, mocking person from a year ago. "I don't know if I have any right to call you," but I had to try. I waited. I wasn't going to help him through this, whatever this was. This was his conversation to have. "I'm sorry," he said, and he was crying now. I could hear it clearly in his voice. "Mom, I'm so sorry. What I did, what we did, it was unforgivable. There's no excuse. I treated you horribly. I allowed my wife to abuse you. Worse, I participated in it. I laughed while you were hurting." I was hearing the words I'd wanted to hear for over a year. But I was careful. I'd heard words before that didn't lead to changed behavior. "Why are you calling now?" I asked. Not harshly, but directly. "What's changed?" Another silence. Then, "Malia and I separated 2 months ago. And before you think this is me just running back to you because my marriage fell apart, that's part of why I'm calling now, I guess, but it's not the only reason. In therapy, I've been in therapy for 6 months now, individual therapy. I've been starting to see things more clearly. How wrong I was, how messed up my thinking became. Therapy, that was significant. At least he was asking for help. I made myself believe that you were the problem, he continued. His voice was shaking. Malia kept saying you were controlling, interfering, trying to come between us. And I believed her because it was easier than standing up to her. I've always been a conflict avoider, you know that. It was easier to go along with her version of reality than to fight her or defend you. I listened to him pour out this confession. Part of me, the maternal part that had loved him since before he was born, wanted to comfort him, to say it was okay. But it wasn't okay. And I shouldn't rush to comfort him when he'd caused so much pain. When he finished, I took a breath. Jackson, I said carefully, I hear your apology, and it means something that you're in therapy, that you're trying to understand what happened. But I need to be honest with you. What happened at your birthday party, that was traumatic for me. The physical violence, yes, but also your mockery, your willingness to humiliate me in front of so many people. And that was just the culmination of a pattern that had been going on for years. I know, he said quietly. I know, I don't deserve your forgiveness. It's not about deserving, I said. Forgiveness isn't something you earn. It's something I might choose to give because it helps me heal, not because you've checked off enough boxes. But trust, relationship, those have to be earned back. And that takes time, a lot of time, and a lot of changed behavior. I understand, he said. Would you consider maybe meeting with me? Just for coffee? Just talking? No pressure, no expectations. I just want you to see that I'm serious about changing, about making amends. I considered it. Part of me wanted to say yes immediately, but the wiser part, the part that had learned hard lessons, urged caution. I need to think about it, I said finally. I think that's fair. I need to process this call, talk to my therapist, consider whether I'm ready for that. I could hear the disappointment in his voice, but he accepted it. Whenever you're ready, he said. Or if you're never ready, I understand that too. I'll respect whatever you decide. We ended the call shortly after that, and I sat with it for a long time, just feeling everything that came up. I called Sarah and Kate and told them about Jackson's call. Sarah was cautiously skeptical. I hope he's genuine, Mom, she said, but please be careful. Don't let him hurt you again. Kate was similarly cautious, but slightly more open. The fact that he's in therapy is good, she said. My therapist friends say real change is possible, but it requires sustained effort. One apology phone call isn't enough. I talked to Dr. Morrison about it in our next session. She asked me good questions. What do I want from a potential reconciliation? What boundaries would I need? What would have to happen for me to feel safe emotionally? What would I do if his change turned out not to be genuine? She gave me homework, to write out my answers to those questions before I made any decision about meeting with Jackson. I did the writing exercise, and it brought clarity. What I wanted from a potential reconciliation was simple: mutual respect, honest communication, accountability for past behavior, consistent changed actions over time. One meeting wouldn't be enough. I'd need to see months of demonstrated change. The boundaries I needed: no contact with Malia unless she also apologized genuinely and got help for her abusive behavior. Respect for my relationship with daughters, regardless of his relationship with them. No guilt trips or manipulation, and the right to end any conversation or interaction if I felt disrespected. To protect myself, I'd need to go very slow. Maybe supervised meetings at first, having Sarah or Kate present. Public places, not private homes. Short interactions at first, building up gradually only if things went well. And if his change turned out not to be genuine, I'd walk away and not look back. I deserved peace more than I deserved a relationship with someone who hurt me. Armed with this clarity, I called Jackson back 3 weeks after his initial call. "I've thought about your request," I said when he answered. "I'm willing to meet with you, But there are conditions. Anything, he said eagerly. Maybe too eager. Time would tell if he meant it. I laid out my terms. Meetings would be supervised by one of his sisters for at least the first few months. They would be monthly at most. They would be in public places, and I reserved the right to leave at any time if I felt uncomfortable. He agreed to all of it. The first meeting was set for 2 weeks later at a coffee shop with Sarah present. When the day came, I was nervous in a way I hadn't been nervous in years. Sarah drove me there and sat at a table nearby, close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough to give us privacy. Jackson looked different than the last time I'd seen him at that awful birthday party. He looked older, thinner. His eyes were different too. There was a humility in them that hadn't been there before. Our greeting was awkward. We stood across from each other for a moment, uncertain. Then we sat down. "Thank you for meeting with me," he said. His voice was quiet. He sounded genuinely grateful. "You're welcome," I said. I was being careful with myself, monitoring my own feelings constantly. Any red flag and I'd leave. What followed was a slow, difficult conversation. Jackson apologized again, in more detail this time. He acknowledged specific things he'd done and said, the impact they'd had on me. He listened when I talked about how much he'd hurt me. I asked him questions. What was happening with Malia now? They were no longer together, he confirmed, and he'd filed for divorce. She'd been furious, according to him, had threatened him, and that had been part of what helped him see her clearly. His therapist was helping him understand the patterns, how he'd been controlled, but also how he'd participated in that control, especially toward me, especially in directing it toward me. He was working on building healthier boundaries, on standing up for himself, on recognizing manipulation. It was all good. It was promising. But I was cautious. I'd heard words before. I needed to see actions over time. That first meeting lasted about an hour. It wasn't warm and fuzzy. There were no hugs, no declarations of restored relationship. It was just a first step, tentative and fragile. We continued to meet monthly. Sometimes Sarah supervised, sometimes Kate. Slowly, very slowly, I began to see consistency in Jackson's behavior. He showed up when he said he would. He respected the boundaries I set. When I said I wasn't ready to discuss certain topics yet, he didn't push. When I expressed hurt or anger about the past, he didn't get defensive or try to manipulate me out of those feelings. After 6 months of these meetings, I felt comfortable enough to meet with him one-on-one without my daughters present. Still in public places, still with clear boundaries. 8 months into this slow reconciliation, something unexpected happened. I received a letter from Malia. My first instinct was dread. What now? Another attack? More blame? I almost didn't open it, but I did. The letter was surprising. It was an apology. Stiff and formal, not particularly warm, but it acknowledged that she'd been wrong to hit me, that her behavior toward me had been inappropriate, that she'd played a significant part in the deteriorating relationship between Jackson and me. I noted that she didn't take full responsibility. There was a lot of "we both" and "the situation" phrasing that diluted accountability. But it was more than I'd expected to ever receive from her. I didn't respond to the letter. Maybe someday I would. Not ready. But I wasn't ready. Closure for myself. The closure I needed didn't come from her words. It came from within. It came from within, from my own healing process. Now, 18 months later, now, 18 months after that terrible birthday party, I can say that Jackson and I have a relationship again. Not same as before. It's not the same as it was before. Never will be. It never will be. Different. But it's something. Built on honesty. It's built on honesty and much clearer boundaries than we had before. Seeing him. I see him every few weeks. We have conversations that are deeper and more real than we ever had before the crisis. We talk about hard things, his therapy insights, My healing process. My healing process. Mistakes we both made. The mistakes we both made in our relationship over the years. Not excusing him. I'm not excusing what he did. Forgiving, but not forgetting. I'm forgiving it in the sense that I'm not holding on to bitterness, but I'm not forgetting it either. That memory serves as a boundary marker for me. Far enough. This far and no further. Treatment won't accept. This is treatment I won't accept. Jackson is working on himself in ways that seem genuine. He's continuing therapy. He's rebuilding relationships with his sisters and with old friends he'd lost touch with. He's becoming a different person than he was with Malia. Maybe original self. Maybe more like his original self. Maybe someone entirely new. Time will tell. Time will tell. As for Malia, I hear through the grapevine that she's moved to another city, remarried someone else fairly quickly. I have no contact with her and don't plan to. That's a necessary boundary for me. My life now is full in ways it wasn't even before all this happened. I've built a community of friends and activities that bring me joy. I'm close with my daughters and their families. I'm tentatively rebuilding with my son. And I'm my own person, with my own identity separate from being anyone's mother. I've learned hard lessons about love and boundaries. True love doesn't mean accepting any treatment. Setting boundaries isn't unloving. Setting boundaries isn't unloving. It's actually one of the most loving things you can do for yourself and for the other person. Because when you accept unhealthy behavior, you're enabling it, allowing someone to be their worst self. I've also learned that grief isn't always about death. Sometimes you grieve the living, grieve relationships that die even while the people in them continue on. That grief is valid and real and deserves to be honored. This emotional story, this family drama that became my real-life story, doesn't have a neat resolution where everything goes back to normal. There's a new normal now, one that acknowledges what happened and what can't be undone. And I'm okay with that. It took time. It took work, therapy, support from people who loved me, and a willingness to stand up for myself, even when it was painful. If you're listening to this and you're in a similar situation, whether family or other relationship, whether it's a child, a spouse, a parent, or someone else you love, please know you have permission to protect yourself. You're not selfish for refusing to accept abuse. You're not abandoning family by setting boundaries. You're teaching people how to treat you. You're worth respect. You're worth kindness. You're worth basic human dignity. And that doesn't stop being true just because someone is related to you. Sometimes walking away is the most loving thing you can do for them and for you. And sometimes you can leave the door open a crack for change, but only if you're protected, only if you have boundaries, and only if they do the work to earn trust back. You can't fix other people. You can't make them see what they've done wrong. You can only control your own actions and responses. That's your power, your agency. I'm grateful for that power now, even though it came through such a painful experience. I'm standing in my kitchen now as I finish telling this story, making tea, looking out the window at the garden I've been tending. It's spring, and things are growing. The metaphor isn't lost on me. Things grew from pain, can grow from pain, not because of pain, despite it. When we do the work to heal, to set boundaries, to stand in our truth even when it's hard, my son might see this story someday. I'm okay with that. I've told it with as much truth and respect as I can manage, without making it about revenge or humiliation. It's just about what happened and how I survived it. My daughters will definitely see this, and they'll probably call me right after to check in. I'm grateful for them, for their unwavering support. And to you, whoever you are, watching this, if you're relating to this story, If you're seeing your own situation in my words, I'm reaching out across the distance between us to say, you're not alone. You have strength you don't even know about yet. You can get through this. You will get through this. It takes time. It takes support. It takes courage. But it's possible. And you're worth it. If this story touched you, if you found something valuable in hearing my experience, please let me know in the comments. I'd appreciate a like on this video, and if you'd like to hear more real-life stories told honestly, please consider subscribing. And tell me where you're listening from. I love knowing where my family is, all of you who take the time to listen to these stories. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. You're not alone in whatever you're struggling with. My name is Amelia, and this is my story.